Over the course of this series, we've seen practically nothing about the kind of Hulk that popular culture is familiar with. Oh sure, big green guy with incredible strength that increases as he gets angrier, but the simple-minded caveman talking version, he's barely qualified as a cameo. To help understand all of this, it's important to be aware of what is probably the most pivotal Hulk story ever. The story is not only integral to the character, being revisited repeatedly for decades afterwards, but is itself so embroiled in controversy that I'm going to actually hold off on discussing too much about it until we get to its actual appearance. But I feel it's important now because it redefines what is currently happening in the book. The story is about Bruce Banner's father, Brian, who worked with experimental atomic energy. So when he learned his wife was pregnant, he feared the child would have something wrong with it, a genetic consequence of his work. Brian's paranoia, combined with extreme self-centeredness and jealousy of his own son receiving his wife's attention and affection, convinced him that the boy was a monster. Confirmed one Christmas morning when the gifted young Bruce opened his present and built an erector set far beyond the abilities of any ordinary child. Rather than being proud, Brian was horrified and heaped physical and verbal abuse upon the young Bruce, something which continued until finally his madness was so great that Brian killed Bruce's mother, and was institutionalized for being clearly out of his mind. Abuse is known to cause severe emotional issues and can even lead to dissociative disorders, including dissociative identity disorder, the modern term for what was once called multiple personality disorder. This revelation has profoundly shaped the way that the Hulk is perceived. While some assert that this abuse resulted in the presence of the Hulk, the one that we know of as the angry green one, the one commonly referred to as the Savage Hulk, that this Hulk was within Bruce all this time just waiting to be released. But I think that it can be looked at in a different way. Bruce Banner is a man who is scientific. He believes in reason and order, the escape from the chaotic and oppressive world that values aggression and winning at any cost. Banner plows ahead through life, despising men who resort to violence, since, after all, Banner will always be on the receiving end of it. Then Banner undergoes a transformation, the deliberate transformation I'm talking about, when he chooses to become the Hulk with his own mind intact. Yet suddenly, Banner has tremendous power. There's not a man alive that he's aware of that is stronger than he is now. A weakling no more, this side of Banner doesn't see being a monster as a curse, but as a boon. This side revels in being the Hulk, loves being powerful, loves being strong enough to take revenge upon any who might try to cross him now. But the Hulk's actions lead to a vicious cycle. The Hulk smashes a jeep, so the Hulk is hunted. So the Hulk destroys more equipment, so he's hunted more fiercely. So he lashes out, and they fight back. And even the heroes turn on him eventually, and soon it's not fun anymore. It's abuse all over again. The Hulk just wants humanity to leave him alone and stop hunting and hurting him, like the frightened child who doesn't know why his father is screaming monster while beating him. Let's watch this unfold. Issue 75 of Tales to Astonish begins right where we left off. The leader is now dead, and while the Hulk is pleased that he's no longer obligated to help his late enemy, he also laments about being hounded by humanity solely for existing. Yet the one thing the Hulk insists that he never wants to do is turn back into Banner again, even if he can survive doing so now. His mind clearly teeters for the reader between Bruce and the Joe persona, as Bruce seems to more and more want to withdraw from the threat the world poses. But even Joe can sense that his intelligence is fading. So the Hulk tries using the sphere from the Watcher, hoping that his thick skin and toughness will save him from the leader's fate, but what it gives him is a vision of what's happening with Rick, who's locked up because of helping the Hulk. To help him, the Hulk plans to go to Washington. The president knows his identity, remember, but General Ross has had the military build the T-gun, a weapon based upon Banner's plans, unsure of what it does, but under orders to find out. With the Hulk heading towards Washington, they fire at him, unaware that the T stands for time. And so the Hulk is hurled into a future where the city is in ruins and hooligans attack him. But he's able to stand up to all their weapons. But realizing this, they decide to take him alive, and that they can do, thanks to a device that emits so much gravity that even he can't remain standing. When it wears off, the Hulk is already plotting his escape, with a caption box making explicit that with the mind of Bruce receding, the Hulk can't remember that he actually is Bruce Banner. The locals then take the Hulk to their king, who says that the evil one threatens them all, but the Hulk doesn't care. He doesn't care about who are the good guys or the bad guys in their fight. He just wants to get home, and he is prepared to beat up whoever it takes to make that happen. So after thrashing these guys, he escapes and heads to the invading forces of the evil one to see if he can help, learning this is actually the Asgardian called the Executioner, each now in the most even match of their lives. During the fight, as the Executioner's forces are prepared to level the city that he'd escaped from, the Hulk is content to let it happen until he admits that he can't. And the fascinating thing to note is that there is no indication that this is being caused by Banner emerging. We've been reading more and more the opposite, actually, that Bruce Banner is being subsumed and the Hulk taking over more and more. So this isn't an indication of Bruce overcoming his savagery. It's that the Hulk is, in the end, a hero, no matter what he says. What we have are the three aspects of this being at this time: Bruce, Joe, and the Savage. The one who wants reason, the one who revels in his power, and the one who wants the bad stuff to just go away. These are facets of Banner because, as we've seen, there's a shifting between them in the Hulk form, sometimes fully analytical and controlled, sometimes a menace, sometimes a desperate, angry child. Decades later, a psychiatrist who is intimately familiar with the Hulk's mind will describe them as being analogous to the trio of the superego, the ego, and the id, respectively. Now, that is certainly an arguable point. If you're unfamiliar, Freud's theory was that the id is primitive instinct, the ego is the practical pursuit of desires, and superego is the sense of right and wrong. Now, what's particularly notable is that the Joe persona will become associated with the Hulk in his gray form, even though the version that we saw as gray back in Incredible Hulk #1 was most definitely not Joe. But rather, in the future, we will see that Joe predominantly is in the gray Hulk body, and thus is referred to as the Gray Hulk. In contrast, for decades, the Savage Hulk was the only Hulk, the big green guy. So the idea that the Hulk could look like the Green Hulk, but acts like the Gray Hulk, led to fans referring to the Hulk in this time as the Gravage Hulk. Not a different persona, just an unusual pairing between the mind and the body. Incidentally, some fans use the term Gravage Hulk in a different way. In fact, there's not even an agreement among them of what that would even mean. So I'm going to continue to use Gravage Hulk the way it was originally conceived, to refer to the Hulk of this time frame. But this may lead to some confusion if you read other works about the Gravage Hulk that use a different interpretation. But one important thing to take away from that is the mere fact that we're having to discuss these terms and the conflict around them illustrates just how complicated the Hulk is if we can't even come up with a common terminology to describe a few small aspects of the character. What is particularly significant about the Gravage Hulk, however, is how it relates to that id-ego-superego discussion. It's believed that to properly consider those three, it's like a box divided in two halves, or in the case of this illustration, an iceberg. Why not? The right side is driven by primitive desires. The left side is driven by morality. Because being moral in human society is largely viewed as a positive, this side is occupied solely by the superego. The primitive desires side, however, cannot be allowed to simply run free in a human society. You can't kill, steal, or rape just because you might want to, so this side is shared by the ego and by the id. compared to the idea of a horse and a rider. A horse is a powerful animal, but not terribly bright. The rider knows how to make use of its power to the benefit of both. Likewise, the ego knows how to satisfy many of the desires that they both have in such a way that they won't be ostracized, arrested, or killed. Joe and the Savage are both part of the primitive Hulk side of this being, connected not just by their power, but by their primitive instincts. It's just Joe is capable of interacting with more than just smashing, punching, or raging. But this event, the Hulk, but not Banner, is the one choosing to defend a city because it's the right thing to do, shows that the trio are just more than those ciphers. They're comparable analogies, certainly, yet there is a complexity to them that is far greater than even they themselves will want to admit. At one point, Joe will claim that any positive emotions down deep is just Banner and that he's all surface. But that's not really true. In fact, I think we may have just witnessed when the mind of Bruce Banner is beginning to crack, when the most selfish and primitive part of this being, with no Bruce mitigating him, looks upon a city that he has no loyalty for and still can't just stand there and do nothing. That's the behavior of more than just a dark side. That's a growing alternative personality that has gained its own superego, even if only a small one, the capacity for right and wrong, and to choose right over self-interest. In the present, Ross gets chewed out about losing the Hulk, so the kid gloves are off when he gets to question Rick Jones. But Rick doesn't know what happened to the Hulk, and eventually they can only let him go. Although on Ross's order, Talbot is sent to keep tabs on the kid. He follows Rick to the cave where he laments all that has happened, especially that everyone thinks that the Bruce Banner who served America and saved his life is being treated like a coward and a traitor. So when Talbot finally comes to him, and believing that the Hulk is dead, Rick decides to defend his legacy by revealing the truth that the Hulk and Banner are the same person. However, that's when the Hulk returns, the effect of the gun having worn off, depositing him, inexplicably, in his own cave. Talbot expected that he might return, and has even prepared a complex trap to force him into gas-filled pits. One might expect that, since Talbot alone has been told the secret, that the story might conspire to keep Banner's secret identity by having some kind of misadventure result in the Major's death. But no. We soon see Rick is also telling Betty. This time the secret is staying out. This is the beginning of the end for this era of the Hulk, as we'll see. With Banner presumed dead, Dr. Zaxxon is taken over. But while he talks of the scientific benefits of studying the Hulk, he's actually plotting to learn how to harness the Hulk's power in order to take over the world. So he dons a special suit, sends away the soldiers, and tries to extract the power of the Hulk with his special gun. But during this, the gun gets slapped aside. Zaxxon leaps after it and gets killed by the accidental discharge. But without witnesses, it's assumed that the Hulk murdered him during his escape, which will lead him into the path of Hercules. In the early days of the Marvel Universe, with the constant crossovers between the characters, Stan worked to try to keep it all consistent across the books. If Iron Man was tied up somewhere in his book, then he wouldn't be in the Avengers that month because he was a prisoner. Eventually, this got to be too much. Part of the reason that Stan pulled characters with their own books out of the Avengers, with Captain America as the exception, because at that time his book was telling tales of his past adventures, so there was no need to worry about current continuity. The Hulk actually made an appearance as a result of this. With Thor gone, Cap felt the new team needed the Hulk's strength. But their effort to find him failed because they came while the Hulk was in the leader's headquarters, which was too well hidden for them to find. I mention this because over on Thor, the titular hero had just gone up against the newly introduced character to the Marvel Universe, Hercules. Spoiler warning for a 54-year-old comic story. Thanks to Odin's interference in Thor 126, Thor lost a fight to Hercules, winning Herc fame and glory and an opportunity to become a big celebrity in Hollywood. though the cool story bro meme has probably brought a lot more fame than that. There would be a rematch in Hollywood in Thor 128, so because this issue occurs in between there, Herc is currently on a train taking him from there to Hollywood, when he'll cross paths with the Hulk. Rather literally, since fighter planes pursue the Hulk onto the tracks, and the Hulk pulls up some rails and throws them at the planes to try to stop them from shooting at him. During this, the Joe persona is clearly sliding towards the Savage persona again. The pursuit, the harm being inflicted upon him just for being alive, is drawing out the frightened child in a very angry man. The train is able to stop safely, but after his agent has been discussing the Hulk, Hercules is all too ready to mix it up with this adversary. It is an epic fight that results in a draw, since the military closes in and the Hulk is forced to retreat and hide, with the next issue opening with his lamentation of why everyone always wants to hunt and destroy him. But even as he announces his intention to again fight back against the world that despises him, he's transported away. I said last time that once in a very great while, Tyrannus from issue number 5 of the original series makes his return, and this is the first one, though not as good of a shape as he was that time. Tyrannus was ancient because of the Fountain of Youth, but someone has taken it. In return for helping Tyrannus to regain it, the Hulk will have a place where he can be accepted. The person that he must defeat is the Fantastic Four's own subterranean enemy, the Mole Man and his minions. The Hulk is on board, and in fact when Tyrannus reveals that he's kidnapped Betty, Rick, and Major Talbot, the Hulk wants nothing to do with them. During a fight with the Mole Man's superweapon, the two fall into the fountain and there's an explosion, after which the Hulk finally, for the first time since Banner was shot in the head, turns back to Bruce Banner. Issue 81 introduces two new elements to the Marvel Universe. The first is the Secret Empire, an occasionally reoccurring group seeking global domination. You might think that it sounds like one of those long-forgotten groups when you already have Hydra and AIM and the like to already pursue their goals, and it's hard to remember them showing up whenever major gatherings of villains come together, but they have played a part as recently as 2017, although strangely not related to the event that was named Secret Empire, which also occurred in 2017, as absurd as I know that sounds. In their pursuit of global domination, they want a special missile that they see in recorded footage being used against the Hulk. Unsuccessfully, naturally, but impressive enough for them to want to have. This leads to the introduction of the second element, a new villain that, if you are familiar with, might surprise you. It's Boomerang. And no, this isn't like the Wrecker at all, where some more famous villain is going to come along later and use the name. This is the same guy who would one day join the Thunderbolts and make Peter Parker miserable. This is the real McCoy, just in a different costume. Boomerang arrives not long after the army has found Betty, Rick, and Talbot. They have been returned to the surface after Tyrannus no longer needed them. And Boomerang realizes that he can use Betty against her father, and so kidnaps her and flies off. Meanwhile, caught in the war between Tyrannus and Mole Man, Banner turns to the Hulk rather than be killed when marked for death, and after some smashing gets sent back to the surface as well, awakening in issue number 82. Amusingly, to show how language evolves, Stan at one point refers to our hero as the Awesome Hulk, from the time when the word exclusively meant something which inspired awe in people. Impossible to know that decades down the line, the word's meaning would change so much that not only would he have a book calling him the Awesome Hulk, but they would enhance that, declaring him the Totally Awesome Hulk. Let's say no more about that. I've already given away enough previews of the future. The Hulk happens to hear Betty's cries for help and tries intervening, but it's difficult for both parties. Boomerang can dodge the Hulk, but it's hard to do that and not drop Betty. So he tries fighting the Hulk on the ground and fails. But all of this has drawn the attention of the military, so that Ross intends to go personally to deal with the situation, and so leaves Talbot in command, despite his objections, to ensure that the missile is kept safe. Boomerang finally realizes he's outclassed and throws Betty at the Hulk, knowing that the giant will easily catch her and be mollified, and allowing Boomerang to escape with the Secret Empire helicopter. What that means is that, for the first time since she has learned Bruce Banner's secret, Betty is alone with the Hulk. The Hulk digs a cave out for them so that they can take shelter from the rain, but refuses to take her back to her father, but not because he doesn't want to give her up, but because things never end well when he approaches the base. Betty sees the Hulk in a new light, that he's never been given a chance, and that there is no sense at all of the evil that everyone seems to believe is his nature. But their time is cut short when one of Ross's patrols spots them and begins firing on the Hulk, while back at the base, Boomerang is taking advantage of the situation to go after the missile. Rick tagged along and jumps out to stop the Hulk from hurting Ross, and in the end the Hulk grabs him and the General both and takes them away to where Betty is safe. But the Savage Hulk is easily set off, so when Betty says that the Hulk needs her, he takes it as implying that he's weak, and so leaps away to be alone. Yet the next issue shows that what the Hulk really wants is the opposite, to not be alone anymore, but just to be accepted. His much more limited intellect presumes that Betty's presence would make him accepted, and if not that the Avengers are his friends, and they'll help him, showing why the Savage is often also called the Child Hulk, that despite the tantrums, he doesn't want to be abandoned to the cruel world. He just wants to find a place where he can be. To show how different this persona is, this time when the Hulk arrives in New York, he limits his smashing to just a store in order to acquire a hat and coat in order to try to avoid notice. Of course, someone sees through his disguise, but rather than lashing out this time, the Hulk runs for it, trying to avoid being attacked rather than fighting back, lacking Joe's pride and ego. When the news hits, Rick Jones drops everything to head to New York to help the Hulk, unwittingly aiding in the plot of a master villain who claims that he needs a car driven there, but the trunk has a robot that will be released upon arrival. By the time Rick finds the Hulk, Talbot and the military have found the bad guy, but he activates it, though not to fight the Hulk, but rather the robot fires off a beam to draw the missile to hit New York. The Hulk leaps up to stop it, but after catching it, turns back into Banner, leaving the helpless scientist suddenly gripping the side of a missile as it approaches its target. Fortunately, since this came from Gamma Base, it's one of the weapons that Banner designed, so he's able to redirect it safely out to sea. He is ready to die, but the Hulk isn't, emerging and surviving the missile's impact. While it's blamed on Banner's, understandably, quickening pulse in the excitement of the pending crash, longtime Hulk aficionados will likely recognize that the lore implies two things. This is a very controversial view, but I'll share them. One is that Banner will always do something deep down to stop the Hulk from killing innocents. And the other is that the Hulk will always do something to prevent Banner from allowing his own death. I'll deal with these assertions much further down the line, but this seemed a particularly important example for us to note. Despite the heroism, it's presumed that the Hulk and/or Banner were responsible for the missile problem rather than saving it. So to deal with him once and for all, the military activates an experimental humanoid that the leader had been developing. Naturally, they quickly lose control of it and it runs amok, forcing the army to fight against it. And only lucky break for them is that the sound of fighting draws the Hulk's attention. While they brawl, the military is ready to bring in a gun to try to finish them both off, only for a call to come in. The guy who hijacked the missile has been confessing, and he says that the Hulk wasn't helping him, he was foiling the guy's plans. This revelation changes things for Ross and Talbot, for now. One problem Stan had on the Hulk was that his ongoing adversaries had to be, on the one hand, his adversaries, but on the other, also be capable of seeing reason. But threading that needle was difficult, so sometimes you had instances like this, where Ross and Talbot are determined to find a way to save the Hulk's life. And then you have other cases where it is their intention to see the monster killed, even if it means killing Banner. Now in this particular case, we'll rapidly see why it happens, but I'm just saying that overall, you'll see this crazy pattern where It's one extreme or the other, and very little explanation of why. But right now, Banner and the Hulk are both exactly what is needed. The sight of the humanoid injuring Rick when he tries to help so emotionally affects the Hulk that he changes back into Banner. Banner's intellect is enough, though, to see how to actually defeat the humanoid, whipping up a device to do it on the spot. But it requires the strength of the Hulk to actually utilize it. Banner and the Hulk were more separated than they have been since the gamma ray device plunged the original Hulk deep into his mind. But now they were still capable of working together to achieve a goal that neither of them could alone. After that heroism, as well as saving New York City from the missile, the Hulk is hailed a hero. But the Hulk is the story of a monster, and monster stories are frequently ones of tragedy. So it's no surprise that this can't last. Boomerang has returned, having upgraded his gear after losing to the Hulk previously, and while seeing the Hulk being showered with praise and adulation, decides to take a little bit of revenge. His first step is seeing that the Hulk is already being agitated by the crowd, since he's not used to people who don't hate and fear him. All Boomerang has to do, then, is throw a sneaky little attack against the Hulk to convince the monster that his fears were true, that people were just waiting for a chance to hurt him again. Things rapidly spiral out of control, and soon the Hulk leaps away, with Ross all the more convinced that the Hulk is a menace, throwing aside orders from above to save Banner if at all possible, because of a small clause that it was down to his judgment, and Ross's mind has been made up. Boomerang then goes to finish the Hulk with his improved equipment, but it's still not enough. The only thing that helps is some gas which weakens the Hulk until he starts to change back to Banner. Unfortunately for Boomerang, whose leg was broken, and a dam is having structural failure thanks to their fight, it means his only chance of being saved is the Hulk. The Hulk changing back to Banner, though, means that he's unable to maintain his strength long enough to bring Boomerang to safety, though he does try. And note that he hasn't changed yet. Once again, the Hulk is demonstrating a moral sense. We've seen now both his id and his ego have their own superegos. Banner's unconscious body is found by a character who had hassled the X-Men called the Stranger. This powerful entity intends to use the Hulk to further his plans of culling most of the humans from the world and having the rest serve him in his goal of bringing about universal peace. We'll just leave all that to one side. Suffice to say, he's a very powerful alien being that can't be handled by punching, although not for lack of trying. Even the Stranger is impressed, but with his unfathomable power, even the Hulk can't win, and soon he's made the thrall of the Stranger and sent off to cause destruction. Fortunately, the Hulk is drawn again towards Gamma Base. I should note, incidentally, that this place is called various names over the years as it's repurposed, torn down, rebuilt, etc. I'm just sticking with Gamma Base for all of them, since those details aren't really important. The Hulk turns back to Banner when he arrives, who's horrified at what the Hulk is being used to do for the Stranger, and knows that if it's his life or the world, well, then it's no choice. He decides to use a gamma ray overdose in order to end it. Meanwhile, Ross has concluded that with everything that's been happening, they must have yet another spy on the base. It's true, the spy is in fact posing as an MP, and when they discover and arrest Banner, he decides to examine the machine, figuring out this could be a powerful weapon. The spy accidentally activates the machine and transforms into a gamma-powered monster as well, the Abomination. The Abomination is nearly killed by the process. It was intended to overwhelm and kill the Hulk, after all. But he smashes it before it gets to that point, and then continues his smashing as he revels in his power, while Banner can only watch in horror as he is unwittingly allowed a second gamma monster to emerge. He changes to the Hulk, but as the caption box notes, the Abomination absorbed a much stronger amount of gamma rays than the Hulk has, and so in a straight-up fight, the Hulk has finally met his match, bringing us now to issue 91. The Abomination is made off with Betty, leaving Ross distraught and knowing that the one with the best chance of getting her back is now on death's door. Once again, the pendulum swings, and Ross orders his forces to do everything that they possibly can to try to save the Hulk's life. Fortunately, Rick is on hand to suggest the gamma electrodes, which helps to restore the Hulk, but it's an enraged Hulk, convinced that once again they're going to try to destroy him. Even Rick is having trouble, but after a pleading speech while clinging to the Hulk's leg, he gets through enough for the Hulk to revert back into Banner. But since the Abomination already beat the Hulk, Banner feels that this calls for brains rather than brawn. They modify one of his pieces of equipment to lure the Abomination back to Gamma Base, where he begins sapping the monster's strength. But the stress of the situation causes him to transform, and soon the Hulk is duking it out with the Abomination once again. But witnessing all of this is the Stranger, who changes his mind about both the Hulk and about Earth, deciding that he'll spare humanity for now, but that the Abomination would make a worthwhile replacement as his tool, while the Hulk is free to escape, his life on Gamma Base now over. The words of the Stranger tie it all together. Quote, "If a brute such as the Hulk can be so valorous, perhaps there is still hope for the rest of humanity." Note how he's looking at things. The Hulk may be a monster, but should be considered part of the human race, even though he is referring to the part that is not Bruce Banner. The thing to always remember when we talk about the sides of this being, we are talking about different aspects of the same fractured mind. We may be inclined to differentiate Banner from the Hulk personas as the human and the monster, but that's inaccurate. Again, man or monster, he is both, not just in body, but in mind, a human mind, and all the capability of the saintly and the monstrous that involves. It was an all-too-human mind named Brian Banner who beat his son and strangled his wife. The body, in that case, did not reflect the monster that lay within. The things in the Hulk that we may call monster are merely because his body shows that form, but there is a difference. Joe may be a lot of things, but he would never intentionally hurt a child. The Savage may smash in boundless rage, but he would never strangle an innocent. They are the darker sides, but they are nevertheless still sides of a human being. The cautionary tale of Robert Bruce Banner is not of being turned into a monster, but rather the capacity of even a mild-mannered scientist to have the darkest of impulses, to allow the monsters that already live inside of us a chance to run free. But it also shows us what a hero it is, to have the form of a monster, yet refuse to be one.